The library closes at 9, and I almost didn't make it in time. That night was the kind of cold that catches you off guard in early November. The kind where you step outside and it punches through your jacket before you've taken 3 steps. I'd been working late at the office, a brand strategy firm on King Street West, and I'd told myself I was just going to go home, make something quick, and sleep. But there was a book I actually needed, not wanted, for a client pitch on Thursday, a specific title about consumer psychology that my firm didn't have a digital copy of, and I hadn't thought to order in time. So I took the streetcar to the Lillian H. Smith branch and pushed through the door. At 8:43, the woman at the self-checkout was moving faster than me. I noticed her before I noticed anything else. Dark blazer, hair pulled back in one of those loose knots that looks effortless but probably isn't. A stack of 3 books balanced against her arm like she'd done it 1,000 times. She was maybe my age, maybe a bit older, hard to tell. She moved like someone who knew exactly how long she had, and wasn't going to waste a second of it. I found my book in about 4 minutes. I got in the self-checkout line behind her. She was fumbling with her library card, not in a panicked way, more like it had slipped too far down into the pocket of her bag, and she had to set the books on the counter to get to it. One of them slid sideways, and I caught it before it hit the floor. She turned around. Her eyes were dark, almost black in the library's overhead light, and she looked at me for a moment longer than a stranger usually does. Not unfriendly. Just direct. The kind of direct that most people cut away from, and I almost did too. "Thank you," she said. "No problem." She took the book back, finished checking out, and walked toward the exit without looking back. The glass doors swung open, and the cold came in for a second. Then, she was gone. I finished checking out my book, buttoned my coat, and told myself that was that. Except I kept thinking about those 3 books on the drive home. What do you take out of a library in a stack of 3 on a Tuesday evening at closing time? I hadn't seen the titles. I hadn't thought to look. I went back the following Tuesday. Not for her. That's what I told myself. I had another book to return, which was true. And the Lillian H. Smith branch was convenient to the streetcar line, which was also true. I dropped the book in the return slot outside. Then went in anyway. Walked the floor a little. Found myself in the same section where I'd been standing the week before. She wasn't there. I went back Thursday, and then the following Tuesday again. On the second Tuesday, 3 weeks after the first time, I found her in the urban planning section, which I had not expected. She was crouched slightly, reading the back of something, one hand steadying herself on the shelf beside her. Her coat was draped over the crook of her arm. A travel mug sat on the floor next to her bag. I looked down at whatever was in front of me on the shelf, which turned out to be a book about municipal water systems. I pretended to read the back cover. "That one's actually pretty good," she said, without looking up from her own book. "What? The water one?" She glanced up then. Recognition crossed her face for a moment, or something like it. "You're the person who caught my book." "Ah. Yeah. Is municipal water infrastructure a professional interest or a personal one?" I looked at the book in my hand. Honestly, I just grabbed whatever was in front of me. She looked at me steadily. "Why?" I didn't have a good answer for that either. "You were here and I panicked a little," I said, which was more honest than I'd planned. Her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "Well, the water book is still good." She looked back at hers. "The author is thorough." I put it back. "What are you reading?" "Transit Corridors and Land Use in Mid-Sized Canadian Cities." She stood up straight and handed it to me, like she was waiting to see what I'd do with it. I looked at the cover. "Is this for work?" "Yes." "What kind of work?" She took the book back. "Urban planning." "With the city?" "Private firm." "But city adjacent." She tucked the book under her arm. "What do you do?" "Brand strategy." She seemed to turn that over for a moment. "Does that mean you make things sound better than they are?" Sometimes, I said. Mostly I try to make sure people know what they actually are first. She considered this. That's a more useful answer than I expected. She told me her name was Ines. Ines Marchetti. She said it the way people say names they've had to correct the pronunciation of too many times. Up front, clearly, watching to see if I'd get it right. I did. She seemed mildly surprised. We stood in the urban planning aisle for another 10 minutes, which felt like either 2 minutes or 40, depending on which part of it I was remembering. She asked pointed questions. Not small talk. She wanted to know what I thought about the Eglinton Crosstown delays, whether I thought the 2031 housing targets were realistic, and what I actually meant when I said brand strategy. I gave her real answers because she looked like the kind of person who could spot a placeholder from the next aisle over. When she had to leave, she said it without apology, mid-sentence. I need to go. I almost said nothing. Then, I said same time next week. She looked at me for a moment. I'm here most Tuesdays. That was it. She left. She was there the next Tuesday, and the one after, and the one after that. We didn't plan it, at least not out loud. She'd be in a section, I'd find her, we'd talk. Sometimes 40 minutes, sometimes 20. The conversations didn't follow any arc I recognized. She'd move from city infrastructure to her grandmother's recipe for ribollita, to a documentary about migratory birds. She'd watched twice. I told her about a campaign I was building for a client I disagreed with, and she listened with the same focused attention she gave everything and said, "So you're good at hiding what you think." I told her I was good at framing it differently. She said, "Those weren't the same thing." She was right. The week before Christmas, she mentioned a talk happening at the Bata Shoe Museum. Some speaker she wanted to hear about vernacular architecture. She said it casually, the way you might mention a thing to nobody in particular. Then she looked at me. "You should come," she said, "if you want." It wasn't a question exactly. It wasn't quite an invitation either. It was a statement with a door left open. "Okay," I said. She sent me the details by email. We hadn't exchanged numbers yet, only emails, which felt like a very Ines thing to have happened without being discussed. The talk was on a Thursday. She was already inside. When I got there, sitting in the second row, her coat folded on the seat beside her. She moved it when she saw me. We sat next to each other in those close-together lecture chairs, with our arms occasionally touching, and neither of us moved away. Afterward, we got dinner at a place on Bloor she said she liked. It wasn't loud or impressive. Linen napkins, a short menu, the kind of place that had been there for 20 years and wasn't trying to prove anything. She ordered the pasta and a glass of Barolo. I got the lamb. We talked for 2 hours. She laughed at something I said. Actually laughed, not politely, and then looked a little surprised by herself, which was the best thing I'd seen in weeks. Walking back to the subway, the cold was back. That November turned December cold that makes the streetlights look sharper. She stopped at the St. George entrance and turned to face me. "I had a good time," she said. "So did I." She looked at me for a moment, then, "Same time next Tuesday?" This time she was the one who said it. I smiled. "I'll be there." She went down the stairs. I stood there for a second longer than I needed to, watching the entrance, like the stairs might give me something more. They didn't. She wasn't there the next Tuesday, or the one after that. I told myself she was busy. It was December, and the city turns into a logistics problem in December. Everyone has somewhere to be, something to finish before the break. I sent one email, something light, asking if she was all right. She replied 3 days later. Just 4 words. "I'm fine. Sorry, Cam." That was my name, and she used it, and there was nothing else. I read it 5 times. I still don't know what I was looking for in those 4 words. January came. The library felt different in January, which was a strange thing to notice. The same floor, the same shelves, the same overhead hum. But her Tuesday absence had become a fact now, not a coincidence. I stopped going to the urban planning section. I went to the other side of the building and stayed there, which felt dramatic and which I did anyway. By mid-January I'd stopped going entirely. Then one afternoon in February, walking back from a client meeting downtown, my phone rang. A number I didn't have saved. I almost let it go. I picked up. It's Scenes. I stopped walking. Someone behind me on Bay Street nearly walked into me. "Hi," I said. "Are you free Thursday evening?" I stood on the sidewalk in the cold with my briefcase in one hand and my phone in the other and said, "Yes." She named a restaurant on Queen West. 7 o'clock. I said, "Okay." She hung up. Thursday. She was already there. A corner table, which I noticed because she'd picked the chair that faced the door. She watched me come in. She looked like herself. The same focused composure, the same careful posture, except around the eyes. Something was different. Not tired exactly. Held, maybe, like she'd been carrying something for a while and hadn't found a place to put it down. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You called," I said, sitting across from her. That's all it took. The waiter came. We ordered. When he left, she put her hands flat on the table, and I recognized the gesture. The same deliberate setting down she did when she was about to say something she'd been working toward. "I disappeared," she said. "I know I said same time Tuesday and then I didn't come. I noticed. I handled it badly." She said it plainly, not as self-flagellation, just as a fact. I was realizing how Eanes talked about hard things, with the same level voice she used for transit corridor statistics. "What happened?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, which with Eanes was never empty. She was always doing something in the silence. "I run projects that take months of groundwork before anything visible happens," she said. "Land use applications, community consultation, site analysis. I build things slowly and carefully, and I know every variable before I commit to anything." "That sounds like you," I said. "Yes." She looked at me directly. "And then I met you in a library aisle and I told you my name, and within 3 weeks, I was sitting next to you at a lecture and feeling something I hadn't planned for." I waited. Last relationship was with someone I'd known professionally for 2 years before we got involved, she said. "I thought I knew the variables. I was wrong. We were together for 4 years. When it ended, I lost the work too. A project I'd spent 18 months on. He was the lead consultant on the city side. He pulled the contract." She said it without flinching, but her fingers tightened against the table. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't want sympathy for it. I just want you to understand why I built walls, carefully, with permits." The corner of her mouth moved. "When you started feeling like something I looked forward to, it scared me. So I made distance, by disappearing. Yes, which was unfair to you. I thought about the Tuesdays, the library aisles, the email she'd sent with 4 words. It was," I said, "because it had been, and she wasn't asking me to say otherwise." "I know." We sat with that for a moment. The restaurant moved around us. Other people's evenings. Other conversations. And for a while neither of us said anything, which felt less uncomfortable than it should have. I told her things I hadn't planned to. About the campaign I'd been working on for 3 months that I was starting to hate. About the fact that I'd built a client list that looked impressive from the outside and felt increasingly like I was performing a version of my job rather than actually doing it. About how I'd spent a lot of the last year being competent and almost none of it being honest. Eanes listened without cutting in. At one point she looked at me and said quietly, "You don't have to be good at everything in the room, you know." "People expect it," I said. "Most people expect what you show them." She picked up her wine glass. "That's not the same as what they actually want." By the time we left, something between us had shifted, or was shifting. Not fixed. Not resolved. But different from how it had been when I walked in. Outside, the February night was sharp-edged. The streetlights on Queen West gave everything a slightly orange quality. She stood on the sidewalk buttoning her coat, and I was about to say something careful. Something that left room when she looked up and said, "Before we figure out whatever this is, I need to tell you something." Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. "What?" I said. She drew a breath. Not audibly, barely. "The night we met at the library. Right in the comments, should I have felt deceived when I found out what Eanes had done? Or did the truth she told me change everything? I'm not sure I've decided yet." I stared at her. She didn't look away. She never looked away. "It wasn't coincidence," she said. "Your firm's name had come up in a planning stakeholder list I was reviewing. Cross-sector consultation. I looked up the principals. I found your name, your LinkedIn, some panels you'd been on. And I read that your firm had recently moved offices to King Street West, near the streetcar line." "Okay," I said, and the word came out flat. "The library branch is 3 stops from King West on the 506. I felt the cold more now. "You were researching me," I said. "I was curious about someone whose work I thought might intersect with mine. I told myself I was being practical." She looked at me steadily. The fumbling with the library card was real. "But I had been there 2 Tuesdays before you came in for the first time. Looking for you." The street noise seemed to thin out. A streetcar hummed past on Queen and then everything was quiet again. "You chose that section," I said. "Yes. You let me think it was chance. Yes." I looked down the street because I needed somewhere to look that wasn't her face. She kept going. "I didn't expect the water systems book. I didn't expect you to say you panicked. I didn't expect to still be in that aisle 10 minutes later telling you what I thought about transit land use." A pause. "I didn't expect to want the Tuesdays. But you started them, knowing I might be there." "Yes." I thought about the moment I'd caught her book. The direct look. The way she'd said her name like she was presenting it. The fact that she'd known every Tuesday where I worked. Which line I likely took, which branch was most convenient. What had felt like luck now had an architecture behind it, and the architecture had her name on it. "I need time," I said. She nodded. "Just once. No argument, no attempt to pull me back in. You should have it." I put my hand up for a cab. One came faster than cabs usually do. Through the window I could see her on the sidewalk, standing still, watching the car move. The same composed posture as always, but something in it, now, looked less certain than before. I took 4 days. I went to work. I sat through a Thursday morning debrief about Q1 projections and gave opinions that were apparently useful. I ate lunch by myself at a place on Adelaide that I liked, or had liked, or was used to. I ran along the waterfront on Saturday morning in cold that made my lungs ache. The whole time I kept going back to the library. Not the physical place, the idea of it. That first Tuesday. The book sliding off the counter. Her face turning toward me. She had been there before me, waiting. That was the part I couldn't get past. Not because it was calculated. I understood, now, why she would do something calculated. I understood the architecture of that. The way she built careful things in careful stages. But because I had believed the look, I had believed that something unrepeatable had happened, that we had landed in the same aisle, by the particular randomness that makes a life feel larger than its logistics. And we hadn't. Except, I kept remembering the other things. The 10 minutes in the aisle becoming 40, the way she handed me the transit book, watching to see what I'd do. The restaurant on Bloor, where she knew they'd been open 20 years. The lecture where she moved her coat from the seat beside her when she saw me come in. The laugh that surprised her. The 4-word email that felt inadequate and deliberate at the same time. She could have kept it buried. She had kept it buried, for months. Nothing I'd said or done had forced the confession. She had been the one, standing on Queen Street in February cold, to say, "Before we figure out whatever this is." That part wouldn't leave me alone. On Tuesday morning I called her. "Meet me at the library," I said. "Tonight at 8. A pause. Longer than usual for Eanes. "Okay," she said. When I got there, she was on the 2nd floor, sitting in one of the reading chairs near the window, not in the urban planning section. No books in her hand. She was just sitting, coat folded across her lap, watching the door. She saw me before I reached the top of the stairs. I sat down across from her. For once we had a small table between us, which felt fitting. "I've been thinking about what you told me," I said. She waited. "You placed yourself in my path," I said. "You knew which branch, which evening, roughly when I might come in. You let me believe the first look was unrehearsed." "Yes," she said. "That was a kind of deception. A small one, maybe, but real. It was. It made me question everything after it. Whether the conversations were real. Whether you were genuinely interested, or gathering information. Whether I was a project." Her jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't flinch. She sat still and let me say it. "You were never a project," she said. When Ines said something like that, without modulation or softening, I believed it in a way I hadn't expected to. "I know," I said. I think I knew even in the worst of the 4 days. But I needed to be honest about what hurt before I could figure out what to do about it. She looked at me carefully. "And the mornings were real," I said. "Or the Tuesdays, I mean. The things you remembered that I'd said. The fact that you handed me a book about transit corridors within 5 minutes of meeting me, which is not a test most people would pass or fail." Something moved in her expression. The laugh at dinner. The email that was 4 words because you didn't know how many to use. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't, I know." I leaned forward, elbows on the table, between us. "If this continues, and I think it should continue, I need one thing to be different." "What?" "No more variables I'm not aware of. No positioning, no pre-research I don't know about. If you want to know something about me, you ask me. If you're building toward something, you tell me you're building toward it." She nodded. And it was not a small nod. It was Ines agreeing to something she understood the full weight of, which meant she was also agreeing to find that difficult. "I was afraid," she said quietly. "I waited. That if you knew I had looked for you first, it would change what came after. That you would recalibrate everything." A pause. "And you did." "Yeah," I said. "But I came back." She looked at me across the small table with the window behind her and the library settling into its late evening quiet. Then she reached into the front pocket of her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She placed it on the table between us and didn't say anything. I unfolded it. Her handwriting was exactly what I'd expected. Precise, no wasted strokes. 3 words. No more architecture. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. "We start from here," I said. "From here," she agreed. Outside, the February cold had eased by a degree or two. Barely, just enough to notice. We walked to the St. George entrance. And this time, there was no gap between us, where a decision used to be. She stopped on the sidewalk and turned toward me, and I didn't wait for a question this time. I reached for her hand. She let me. We stood there for a moment, in the ordinary light of a winter Tuesday, and it felt less like a beginning than like the real version of one we'd already had. The same 2 people, the same city, but with nothing hidden between us anymore.